Okay, my name is Mark Graham, Arizona Response Systems, and I have here a Coonan receiver, serial number 401327. It is a Type 3 receiver, and it has a fatal flaw. And when my customer attempted resolution with Dan Coonan, he says there's nothing wrong with the receiver. It is unfortunate, but both Coonan and DSA receivers have gotten so bad in recent years that I have to go through extensive checks and services on each receiver before even beginning the build. Unfortunately, on this last one, 401327, locking shoulder size is the last thing on the list. I have to complete the rest of the checks. I have to make sure the receiver will lock. I have to make sure the holes are the right size. I have to make sure the magazine will fit. I have to put the barrel on in order to know what size locking shoulder I'm going to need. It's not a good practice to hammer locking shoulders in and out of the hole over and over, because it can cause the hole to deform, elongate, stretch, and then it will be loose. So I like to only put a locking shoulder in once. And so I need to have the barrel on it first in order to know what the locking shoulder size is going to be. So to get to that last step of the build and then find out that the locking shoulder hole is so grossly oversized as to make the receiver fundamentally unsafe cost me a lot of time and money. And then to have Dan Coonan tell my customer without even seeing the receiver that there's nothing wrong with it, well, that says something about Mr. Coonan's integrity. And maybe that is something to consider when deciding which receiver to purchase for your build. I can fix a lot, but I can't fix everything. What we have here is a standard locking shoulder. It's brand new. You can see it still has, the factory bronzing to it, and it just has a single digit on it. Standard size.
Standard number 3.
Yeah, which would be a 263. Oversized 1. See, it's a .1. .2 is an oversized 2. .3, oversized 3, largest locking shoulder they make. Standard locking shoulder. Push it in by hand. Here's an oversized 1. I can push it in by hand. Here's an oversized 2. I can push it in by hand. Here's an oversized 3. And this is the largest oversized shank. And again, I can push it in by hand. This is an unsafe receiver. If that locking shoulder walks out during firing, it can cause a catastrophic failure. This receiver is fundamentally flawed and it is not repairable. Dan, the receiver is defective and you need to replace it with one with the same serial number so that my customer, who lives in a state that does not allow him to purchase a new receiver, can have a rifle. This is what I call a large print Coonan receiver. In comparison, this is what I call a small print Coonan receiver. Now there are other problems with the Coonan receiver, but they are usually something that I can work around. For example, on this one, the angle here of the lock lug was incorrect, which prevented the receiver from engaging the receiver lock on the lower correctly. Also, the receiver was too long, preventing proper lockup, so I had to machine the back of it. Also had to do that, I have to do that on most Coonan receivers. And also, these two cuts here and here are necessary to clear the lower receiver and have proper lockup. Dan knows about this and does not do it, and he told that he doesn't do that cut because it would require an additional setup operation in the machine that wasn't worth it, in his opinion. But the problem is that unless you're using a lower receiver that has a clearance cut on the lower, your upper and lower just won't latch all the way. Right here you can see a little bit of a web where this cut here doesn't go all the way to the recoil plate. It's subtle, but you can see on a correct receiver there is a slight cut here that matches the width here, and it's a little bit thicker right here. Now you can see even after machining the rear of the receiver lock lever is elevated above specification. It should be a lot closer to parallel. Not completely, but a lot closer. This is because of the receiver lock lug on the upper receiver and the difficulty and risk of modifying the receiver, even if it is the out-of-spec part, is too much, in my opinion, to modify. So instead of adjusting the height here, adjust the much less expensive receiver lock. Another area to pay attention to is right in there, where the ejector block and the receiver come into alignment. Now, in this case, it's pretty good. But sometimes you will see that the ejector block sticks up just a little bit there, and it will bear on the wings of the lower receiver and prevent proper fitting. This one was really bad. Bolt carrier wouldn't move. I had to file the crap out of the inside in order to get the bolt carrier to clear. Another problem that's endemic and critical to lockup is this area here protruding too far, so the lower will open but it won't open far enough for the bolt carrier to slide out. So I pretty much assume I'm going to have to run a cutter across there to square it. Now this particular one was really bad. It looked like someone had taken a hammer to this edge. You can still see there's a little bit of remnants even after I sanded on it to try to remove the dents. It was dented all along here and all along this edge, the outside edge. And it looked to me like someone had either used a die grinder to deburr and just left divots down the side, or that someone had actually hit it with a hammer. It was pretty bad and actually not typical of a Coonan receiver. Oh yeah, bolt hold open hole is typically undersized, but that's relatively easy to correct just by running a flap sander through it. By flap sander, I mean a piece of rod with some sandpaper on it, chuck it up in a drill, run it through. Same with the hole for the hinge pin. My guess is that the hole is drilled first, and then they do the finish machine cut over the hole. What that does is it raises a burr around the edge of the hole and prevents the hinge pin from fitting. So same as with the bolt hold open hole, just run a flap sander lightly through the hole, just enough to get clearance for the hinge pin.